Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy, but America's agricultural landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertisement campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in, from the producers who make your food, to the store where you buy the final product, and everything in between. This is Real Ag. Now, here's your host, Kyle Bauer.
You might not realize that the state of Kansas was a leading producer of grapes and wine over 100 years ago. In recent years, there's been a resurgence in acres of grapes grown and in Kansas winemaking. Grapes and wine are the topic today on Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible by
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
What sort of plants are grapes?
Well, they're pretty hardy, and they've been around a long time. If you believe the story in the Bible, Noah pulled them off the ark and planted them. So the fact that they survived the flood by virtue of the fact they got on the ark, and they are very resilient and very hardy, I guess would be my experience, except when it comes to cold. If they get frozen in the winter and they get a hard freeze, you can harm certain varietals. But they put their roots way down in the ground. Sometimes they'll go down 10, 15 feet, I think. Once they get pretty well rooted, they're down deep.
They're perennials, so they come out every year, and how we get ours, we were not really growing Cabernet, Chardonnay, things like that here in Kansas. So we grow a lot of French hybrid grapes. It's not the Vitis vinifera that are the traditional grapes around the wine world and the famous wine regions of the world. So it's stuff that will kind of hang out, do a little bit better in our climate here, because we get a little harsher winters here, and certainly a little bit shorter growing season as well.
Basically, there is a huge amount of grapes grown in the United States, and they actually were native to the U.S. And then the ones that you think of that they were basically brought over from Europe, and they're called vinifera, and that's the ones that like the Pinot Noir and the Merlot and the Malbec and all the other ones. And so basically that's where most of the traditional wine grapes, the ones that we have are like Concord and Catawba and different types of American varieties. And so basically what had happened is that they started, the Europeans, when they were migrating over here, basically they brought their plants with them and come to find out that they wouldn't live here very good. So they actually brought some of our American varieties over to Europe too, and they have what's called phylloxera. And so basically all the American grapes that were grown here were actually immune to that. They built up immunities to the phylloxera, and that's like a little tiny insect and that gets into the roots and eats the roots. And they brought them over to Europe, and it just about wiped out all the European varieties. And so they came up with an idea that a couple different ways to do it. They actually cloned the roots, and they grafted the roots from the American varieties and put them on the European varieties. So every single plant that's in Europe now has got some type of a Native American rootstock on it. And then the ones that were growing over here, they come to find out that the American varieties, they just didn't really produce super great wines. So what they did with those, they actually brought them back over here and actually put the American rootstock on them. And then like in California and you know, back up into New York and stuff, well then that's basically what they grow now. It's all done with, you know, American type rootstocks.
How are wine grapes different from table grapes?
And kind of the difference between a wine grape and a table grape like you buy at the grocery store, you know, those are, they've been bred to be seedless now, but they didn't used to be that way. But basically the difference is that, you know, a table grape, or one that we think of that we buy at the grocery store, like Thompson's and stuff like that, I mean, the sugar content's probably somewhere around, I don't know, 13 to 18% is probably about the highest that they usually go. And wine grapes, I mean, that's what makes them wine grapes, not only for the unique flavors and stuff from all the different varieties, but basically they can get, I mean, we don't even pick them until they get to like 19%, and they can go clear up to 30%. So that's kind of the difference between the wine grapes and the table grapes that we buy.
Our grapes, when you come, like when we do our volunteer harvest, when people come out and help us pick, they always are eating the grapes, and they're always surprised at how sweet they are, because you don't usually always get that in your wines. And how that works is basically the sweeter we get them as ripe as we can, and then we ferment them from there. So you add a little bit of yeast to the juice after you crush them and press them, and the yeast goes in there, eats up all the sugar in the grapes, and actually converts that into alcohol. That's your fermentation there. So we do have very sweet, but a little bit smaller berries, and they all have seeds in them as well, so you gotta be a little careful while you're eating them. So when we bring the grapes in here, we crush them, press them, and make them in the juice more or less, and then they go into our tanks here, and that's where they start their fermentation. That's where we add the yeast to them, and they'll start their fermentation. Fermentation usually lasts about a week to 3 weeks or so. And then from there, we'll kind of let them sit for a little while. We'll move them between different tanks here, filter them a couple times, kind of clean them up, get them ready to go before we start to blend them and then get ready to bottle them.
Are grapes nutritious?
They offer all sorts of good benefits. One, they're super tasty, and two, they have a lot of antioxidants. And the resveratrol is that the main antioxidant that you're really getting, helps all sorts of different ailments there. And you know, wine, it's a pathogen-free liquid there, so nothing ever is going to really harm you from it as far as the grapes grow.
You do realize that all the wines that we make, they're completely made from grape juice. And so basically that vine actually pulls up all the minerals and all the, they call them flavonoids and a lot of different types of minerals and stuff, and they actually put it into the grapes. And then we actually take the grapes and we bring them in here and crush them and press them. So all of our wines are made out of nature's juice.
Do you believe what some people say causes you to reduce heart disease, reduce stress, live longer, better sex life? As far as I'm concerned, everybody ought to drink red wine.
Are grapes difficult to grow?
When it comes to small acreage spots that you don't have to have big intensive equipment and you don't have to spend a lot of capital in putting them in the ground, you got $3 to $5 generally per plant depending on where you buy them and what variety you buy. Just takes time to dig the hole, put them in and tend them for the first year, keep them watered. The first year, once they're established, they're pretty resilient and hardy plants.
There's an extreme shortage of vineyards in Kansas, and we're always looking for more grape producers, and I mean, I'd be interested to talk to anybody about it, but basically it's a pretty lucrative thing. It's a little bit to get into it, so basically you can figure like $8,000 to $10,000 an acre just to plant it and to build your trellises and put your irrigation system in. But basically in 3 to 4 years when those plants are producing, then they can actually, you can make anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 an acre depending on the variety that you pick. The plants are productive till they're 25 to 35 years old, so you definitely, the thing about it is kind of like real estate, location, location, location. So you want to have the best sites to do it, but it's something that anybody could do, and it's not too complicated. And I mean, like I said, we're always looking for somebody that would actually be able to sell us their grapes. So I mean, I would definitely steer anybody to help them get started if they'd like. The more that you nurture them and they're not stressed out, then the better they're going to produce. I mean, you can get anywhere from, I mean, our goal on the wine grapes is like somewhere around 4 tons or 8,000 pounds per acre. And, and so you figure like 60, 75, 80 cents, and it keeps going up too. I mean, I wouldn't even imagine that it wouldn't go past $1 a pound. And then if you grew something like the Concords or the Catawba or some highly productive, there's a lot of them too, Cougar Whites, and I mean those things can actually produce up to probably, I don't know, 10, 12,000 pounds per acre. So depending on the variety, and basically before you started, I guess I would have a nice south sloping face and make sure you have water and the soil conditions. There's actually, I mean, there's not really any rules for that. I mean, there's stuff that you can do to amend the soils. And like in Europe and stuff like that, they literally grow it in rocks and, you know, on the side of a cliff. And so, I mean, anything could probably be done, but I mean, the site location is probably the most important thing.
We're a very new world when it comes to certainly growing wine grapes here in the U.S. You know, they've been doing it for centuries and millennia, basically, all around the world. And we just, I mean, back 150 years ago, Kansas was one of the top wine producing regions actually in America, just because we hadn't really discovered all of what we could do here. Thomas Jefferson tried for 50 years or so to grow grapes to make wine out of at Monticello. There was never terribly successful with it, but then, I mean, California just got roaring in about the last 40 years or so. So it's a little more of the Wild West here, certainly in the U.S. and certainly here in Kansas, where there's not necessarily a large wine industry per se, but one that does continue to grow.
Well, of course, Carrie Nation, and actually in this part of Kansas, Carrie Nation literally chopped down the plants. She was so committed to the abolition of alcoholism that she felt that the root cause of alcoholism, of course, would be grapes, which you can make wine out of, or beer or alcohol. And so she was very committed to her cause, and as a result, Prohibition arrived, but a lot of people kept growing grapes anyway. I think that the United States has a long history of growing fruit since the founding fathers. Back in those days, you would make your own stuff to drink, and so it wasn't until we decided that we were going to outlaw alcohol, which of course did not work, and since then, especially since the early 70s, with the advent of the appreciation of the quality of California wines worldwide, there's been a whole new renewed interest in producing fruit across America. And I think Kansas is sort of late getting into the viticultural area because of its dominance on row crops here. But for smaller acreages, I think grapes still do well in Kansas. They grow well here. That what grapes really need more than anything is sunshine. And once you have sufficient sunshine and sufficient water, and once they get their feet in the ground and they're down several feet, it's pretty damp down there, just like trees. But it doesn't hurt to have water to them. My experiences in California when I lived in Sonoma County, people say, well, we plant our fruit on the side of hillsides because we like to put additional stress on the vines, gives it increased character and complexity. So I tell my California friends, rather than growing the grapes on the side of the hills in California, we just grow them in Kansas because they got a lot of stress here, naturally, with the climate.
Do the plants require pesticides or herbicides?
One of the things we have to do here for not all of the fruit, but some of it is to put proper antifungal agents on it in the springtime, because we get a lot of rain generally in April and May. And if it gets rainy for more than 4 or 5 days, a fungus can set in, which can really affect the quality of the fruit. It's called black rot. Another thing called anthracnose. These are all diseases of grapes. So you learn how to spray for those if you're going to be. And this year I didn't put anything on my grapes, and my Norton groups came through fine, while some of my other fruit did not come through very good. And so yes, you have to spray if you really want to keep your fruit in top-notch condition. I think the bigger thing as far as spraying goes is adjoining farms and people that do ditches and that often put 2,4-D to kill weeds. And the drift from 2,4-D, which is very fine particulates, can drift for miles, land on your grapes, and literally cause a lot of curl in the leaf and affect the growth of the plant because it's poison to a grape plant.
Just like any type of farming, I mean, you know, the better you can keep the weeds under control, then the more nutrients and all the water and everything is going to be able to go to the plant. And so basically what we normally do is do a little strip that's right underneath the plant so that basically we can get to it to do any type of pruning or anything that we have to. Plus, we normally just have a real high efficiency drip irrigation system that runs down the rows on the trellis. And basically there's, so you can either do that, I mean, they got what's called a weed badger. That's basically like a rototiller that goes on your tractor and keeps all the weeds, you know, cultivated out from underneath of it. There's a herbicide, you know, that you can actually kill off all the weeds and stuff in there. It's you can't use Roundup, but there's stuff that they've blended to be able to do it so it doesn't actually kill the plants. And then as far as the plant itself, our climate here in Salina is pretty humid. And so we get funguses and you know, different things that happen. So we got like a mist sprayer that we go down through there and spray a fungicide on it a few times a year, just to keep the fungus down on it so that the plant's as healthy as it could possibly be. And there is a few insects, but it's I mean, it's not really too bad. And then like out in western Kansas, you know, the humidity is a lot less, so you'd be able to get by with a lot less of that. Some of the plants in Europe are 100 years old, you know, so I mean, they can produce for a long time. Just basically, it's just like any of us get old, you know, the production starts falling down. But
you know, 500 plants, we've harvested around a ton to ton and a half, 3,000 pounds, let's say. If you really have it doing well, you can get 5,000 pounds per acre. Some people more than that. And it's again how you prune and how well your plants do in the soil that you're in. It's not unlikely to get 5,000 pounds per acre if you're really maximizing your production. That's a little over 2 tons. And so let's just say 2 tons. Let's say you did sell it for $1 a pound. If you had 5,000 pounds, you'd have $5,000 an acre. Well, that beats anything on the wheat side or on the milo side or the hay side. But what kind of labor are you going to have to put into that 1 acre for that $5,000? A lot of people say, I don't want to do that much work.
Does the cost of a bottle of wine determine the taste?
It's all up to you. You know, we have some people who come in here and they try our highest reserve wine there, you know, and they spit it out. And they try our, you know, the stuff we're selling for $8-10 and they love it. So it's a very subjective thing. People can get very romantic about wines. But really, it's at the end of the day, it's what you like. And you know, if you like your $8 wine, great. If you like your $25, $30, $50 wine and you can afford it, that's awesome too.
let's say that they had this year that basically like our Noray's been, you know, we just don't have very much of it. So the fact of the matter is that we have a big patch that produced very little, so it's just like any type of grain or commodities or anything, you know, the supply and demand is one thing. And as far as the quality of the wine, maybe there was an effect on the vineyard that year, and so it was that fabulous wine from 1957 or 2012, and so that does dictate the price. So I mean, when you get into the more expensive wines and that kind of stuff, well, then it does make a lot of difference. But probably the best-selling part of the wine is probably anywhere from $10 to $15, and then it goes up to like the $25 to $30, and then at that point the sky's the limit. You know, and this is the truth of it. All that stuff, you know, those high-dollar wines and that kind of stuff, they all start in the vineyard. So it's actually the grower that does all the fabulous winemaking. I mean, there's a lot of winemakers that say they do it, but the fact of the matter is it starts in the vineyard. That's the neat thing about this, is there's thousands of different palates that love different things. So, I mean, you want to kind of be exploring through the whole market. So it's pretty interesting. And there's quite a few, there's like 30 to 40 Kansas wineries now, and there's a lot more growers than that. They just still can't produce what we're actually selling.
When should a bottle of wine be drunk?
It kind of depends on the grape, really, and what type of wine you're making. Your big-bodied, real heavy tannic wines, like your Cabernet Sauvignons or like our Norton that we grow here in Kansas, those ones you want to sit on for a little while longer. Those ones you can cellar for anywhere, 8 to 20 years, basically, depending on kind of how your vintage went that year. But then you're kind of lighter, usually more towards the sweet wines, which is we're really popular here in Kansas. You usually want to drink those within about 2 to 4 years or so. Those ones don't last quite as long. They lose their fruit a little bit better, and they don't have that sort of oak backbone behind it and the tannin back there to kind of carry it after once the fruit starts to fade a little bit.
Basically, like our Norton that we're just getting ready to bottle, we actually picked those grapes in 2013, and they sat in a barrel for 2 years. And if you taste it, like this year's batch that we just got done fermenting, I mean, it's definitely not like the finished product. But when you go and you age it, and there's all kinds of scientific things that we do to it. I didn't realize it was that complicated when I got into it, but the winemaking part is really interesting. But basically, by the time it goes through the aging process, it's just fabulous. And so I would say, like your dry reds, those are the ones that you actually want to age. The red wines, some of the white wines, you want to age them. Red wines, supposedly they keep getting better, but most of them that you buy in the store, they're at least 3 years old, and they can be up to 5 or 10 years old. And the older they get, they say they get better. And then the white dry wines is something that you could probably age, but mainly it's the drier wines that you age. And then the sweet wines, basically you want to probably drink those pretty soon after they're made and bottled, so they're more something that you would just enjoy right now, so that's kind of how that works.
People in Kansas are generally sweeter because of our history with most of what we drink has a certain element of sweetness to it. And in order to get to where you enjoy dry reds, you either have to drink a lot more wine or have a proclivity for dry red wine. And not everybody likes it, and not everybody likes sweet wine. I think it's up to each individual, because no one thing is better than the other. It's up to you what you like. I like to do brown bagged tastings. Take some Kansas wine, put it in a brown bag next to a French wine, next to a California wine, next to an Australian wine, next to an Argentine wine, and taste it. Don't know what you're tasting, and decide what you like the best. And then it could be a $50 bottle or a $5 bottle. You might choose the $5 bottle. And so it doesn't mean that that's a poor choice. It means what you like or what I like.
What sort of economic impact do grapes have for the region?
They're another interesting crop that we can grow here in Kansas, and certainly help sort of keep the local economy sort of building on itself, I suppose. Because if you're growing your own grapes there, you can always find a winery here to sell it to. Most of our wineries are still pretty small here in Kansas, so you're keeping it all very local as far as that goes. So I think as a sort of local economic impact, it can have a lot of impact in that way. We've done really well in the last about decade and a half here in Kansas of sort of kind of finding our niche a little bit better. And it's kind of only just begun, I think, though.
Well, the grape producers, I think you could do it just like any farm, so basically you could start your own vineyard this spring and bring them over here, and you probably wouldn't have to have any regulations more than what your garden would be. But the wine business, there's a lot of different categories. Everything we're considered a farm winery, so basically we take it from the vineyard, we bring it in here, we actually crush it, we destem it, we ferment it. We've got barrels down here, and I didn't really realize when I got into it that people still use barrels, but that's where the real good stuff comes from. And so basically we do it from the farm to the end consumer. technical term for a farm winery is that 30% of all the grapes that we actually use to make our wine has to be from the state of Kansas. And it used to be 80%, so they've kind of moved it down a little bit because of the shortage of the grapes in Kansas. And so we're, like I said, we're definitely looking for more. I doubt there's any grapes leaving the state. You know, I mean, you can actually buy grapes from California or Chile and get them shipped here for less than what we're paying for Kansas grapes. So I would doubt there's any grapes leaving the state of Kansas if anybody wants to look. I think that we could be, I mean, fabulous in the world market.
Well, we're definitely improving. I think we're learning. I think we're in a learning curve, and at the very beginning of our learning curve. Because in order to learn, you have to have a desire to learn about viticulture. And there's, you know, something that is, not everybody wants to learn that. And so if you want to learn viticulture and you want to learn how to grow grapes, you generally do that once you've decided that you like wine enough to devote yourself to the growing of the grape, and or strictly for money. But I don't think most people are doing it strictly for money. They're doing it for the enjoyment of what they get, the social interaction. We have friends come out, we do this together. I've gotten to have great friends through this, my interactions with people that like wine, that like grape growing, and that like fruit growing. And so it's really more of an avocation that you enjoy doing because you like the associations that you make as a result of that. And so I think it's worth the time. And I think that Kansas, if it decides, if people in the state of Kansas all of a sudden decided they'd like to start growing grapes and join associations that did that, they'd have a lot of fun doing it. I grew up in the farming business milking cows. My dad was a dairy farmer, and so this was just a pasture for the cows when I was a kid. So my mom and dad started planting trees out here, built a house. When I came back after living in Sonoma County for 11 years, I decided I will grow grapes in Kansas. And so we started planting here, and that's how we ended up with a vineyard on an old cow pasture here in Kansas.
Next time you select a bottle of wine, please consider those varieties produced right here in Kansas. And be sure and check out a local winery for a visit. That wraps up this episode of Real Ag. Remember, you can see every program of this series by going to SmokyHillsTV.org. On behalf of the Real Ag crew, I'm Kyle Bell.
Production of Real Ag is made possible by
The Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.